Hi, so in this tutorial we're going to look at Zbrush and how the interface for Zbrush works. So the version of Zbrush that I have here is 2021 6.2, and what I'm going to do is just lead you through the absolute basics of the interface. So probably the first thing we should note is that you can bring objects in using this area up here called Lightbox, which you can find by hitting the comma key. So comma key will bring that backwards and forwards, and in there you've got a whole range of demo projects. I think probably the simplest thing I can do really in this one is bring in something like a Dynamesh Sphere. So if I just double tap that will open that Dynamesh Sphere in 3D space like this, and then I can talk about how you go about drawing on that surface and how you manipulate things in the viewport, which I guess for the most part is really all you need to know as part of this tutorial. So if we look in this section here, if you can, at the top of the screen it says edit, that is, and when you hover over it also gives you keyboard shortcuts if they're appropriate. So edit object is T, and that will stay in editor mode once you've hit T. So T is a toggle, it's easy to remember as well, I guess. Q is draw, W is move, E is scale, and R is rotate. And so that's on the object itself. So that's not about the viewports, that's talking about actually rotating the object or scaling the object. And that's very different from manipulating the viewports. So on this, to the right hand side of the main canvas, you've got a strip that runs down that allows you to manipulate the viewport itself. So you can frame an object by hitting frame. As you can see there, the keyboard shortcut for that is F. Below that you have move object. If I was you, I would probably utilize, just click on the button and move around. We can talk about keyboard shortcuts and other ways of manipulating the move, but it's quite straightforward to do it that way. Zoom as well is nice and simple done that way. Rotate, you can do it from the button, but frankly rotate is easier done from the canvas, so you can just click in the canvas and drag around, and that's a really nice simple way to rotate. As you can see, it's very difficult to get the orientation of a sphere. You don't know where the front of it is, but luckily you've got that head in the top right hand side of the canvas, and that head will point in the direction that you are currently rotating your object. Additionally, if you hold down the shift key, it will snap to the orientation that you're rotating to. Okay, so that's a really handy, quick way of getting things to orient themselves correctly. You can see there's also a grid underneath the object that we've got here. That's this button called floor here, so if you click that, that floor will go away. Not that you can tell, but this object is currently being viewed with perspective distortion, and you can turn that on and off and look at things in orthographic mode if you want to. Because we see things most of the time in real life as 3D objects with perspective, under normal circumstances you leave things in perspective mode in Zbrush because it just makes the object read more clearly. And then because we brought a sphere in here, we have a silhouette that will never change because it's always going to be the same from any direction. However, we can manipulate this. So let's look at some ways of manipulating this that are nice and quick, easy to understand. So let's bring it and let it make it face forward. Let's zoom out a little bit using our zoom tool here. And let's look at the brushes that are available. So on the far left hand side, you've got a whole load of things like the colour and the type of material that's applied to the object, the texture, the alpha, the type of stroke that you're using, and above that you've got the brushes themselves. Brushes are incredibly powerful, so it's worth the time sort of like reading through the list almost as it's on screen here. But under normal circumstances, what we tend to use is a combination of move, or sometimes move topological, which allows you to grab individual vertices in the model and move those. And then we use maybe a couple of other tools beyond that. the ones at the top that are always there are standard clay and clay build-up, and they're incredibly commonly used. And I tend to use an awful lot of damn standard as well, which is under D. As you can see, they're alphabetically laid out. And I'm going to teach you a keyboard shortcut for getting to your brushes, because it just makes it so much quicker. If you know what the brush is called, it's so easy to find. So I'm going to close this down, and then I'm going to press B on the keyboard, which brings that palette back up. And then you add the next letter of the brush that you want. So let's say we want move. So I'll press M, and then it brings up all of the different brushes that start with M. And as you can see, move starts with a V. So if I press V, I get the move tool. The move tool allows me to grab hold of areas on the mesh and move them around. So that would do that sort of thing. You can change the size of your cursor to make that a bigger effect by either, well, it's actually three ways of doing it. If you look at the top of the screen, there is a draw size at the top of the screen here. Additionally, if you hold down the shift key, sorry, not shift, space key, you get the same set of menus. So draw sizes in here, and you can zoom up and down like this. And for the most part, what we do if we're just making small adjustments is we use the square bracket keys, as you would in Photoshop, to grow and shrink those brushes. So that would do that, and you can make it even larger. You can make really large adjustments to your mesh. Okay, so that's that. Control Z is very effective in ZBrush. I'll demonstrate it again a little bit later on, but there's a bar at the top which you can see that has an orange line in it, and that allows you to move backwards and forwards in time, and it kind of gives you infinite undo. So it saves right from the very beginning. When you start manipulating an object, it will allow you to manipulate them in there. So what we currently have here is a Dynamesh sphere, and I probably will talk a little bit about Dynamesh. So let's look at what Dynamesh does. Let's just draw this down like this, and create a shape. I'm not particularly bothered what the shape is. I'm not really trying to create anything particular. I thought it could be a head. There we go. Let's go vaguely head shaped. The next thing I probably should talk about is the fact that you can smooth anything in here. So if you hold down the shift key, you can smooth. We'll come back to this. I'll keep repeating the keyboard shortcuts for smooth later on. I'm going to get rid of that floor grid because it does annoy me. I don't see any purpose for it, particularly when you do a floating head. And let's look at these on the far right hand side of the screen. You've got underneath the menu that's rolled out here, which is Tool, which you can collapse if you want to. You've got Load Tool and Save Tool, and that will save out a file called a ZTL file, and that's usually the file when you're working on a project in ZBrush. You probably work with ZTL files. They're the most efficient and probably the best file type to use. There are lots of different ways of loading and saving things from ZBrush. As you can see below that, you've got import and export. Invariably when we're using those tools, we're saving out OBJ models, which don't have the same amount of data and the finesse that a tool model would have. So you save out tools, and ZBrush works with tools. You can also save out entire projects in ZBrush, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. Invariably it's not used. So if you're working on something that you want to keep for later, I would just use the Save As button in the top right hand corner, and then when you want to bring it back in, just go to Load Tool and find it from your saved items. So the nice thing about tools is that they can have subtools. If we had subtools in here, I suppose I could just add one in, or I could duplicate this one actually. There you go, quick duplicate, and I can also delete in there as well, so that would get rid of that. As you can see, because you just end up with a list of objects in the scene. And you can pick and either choose to make them visible or invisible from here. Further down on this column here, you can choose to put things into solo mode, which would only show the currently selected object. So that's kind of what Subtool is all about. It's far more complicated, as you can see, but as a basic overview, that's what it does. Geometry is where it gets really cool. You can organize your polygons. You can re-topologize on the fly as you go. And as I said, this is supposedly a Dynamesh object. So if we tick on Dynamesh here, you can see that this Dynamesh button is currently in orange, which means it's switched on. This means that if we make the changes that we've made to our object and we look at our line fill for this object, the Dynamesh is stretching the polygons initially, but if you hold down Control and drag in empty space, then that will re-topologize your entire model. Now that's not an elegant retopology, and that's an important factor. Dynamesh is there to give you the starting point for your sculpting and to give you the broad outline. Now I talked earlier about the silhouette in the top corner, and I said it didn't really do anything at this stage because it was a symmetrical object, but now as you can see we've got something that is asymmetrical. Now the problem we've got is that this, as you can see the silhouette change there, this is nothing like a head shape, is it? So if we wanted to make it a more head shape, we would need to think about sort of like pulling out the sort of back of the skull and thinking about sort of where a neck might append onto it. Just thinking about all of the contours of a face and not just thinking about it from two-dimensional perspective. So you know, there's that whole thing of again, you hold down the shift key to snap. So that is still has a very flat point there. But when you're manipulating things in 3D, you're not just thinking about what you would do if you were holding a pencil and drawing in a sort of standard way. You need to consider all of the angles that this object can be viewed from. So this is never going to work. Even if we do that, you see that's just got all sorts of peculiarities as far as its form and structure are concerned. Okay, so what you need to do in the 3D package is start adding landmarks to things and manipulating them to allow you to create form that is readable at all angles. Okay, so this clearly would not work as a face or a head, should we say. There's so much wrong with it. And I'm hitting F to frame that. I'm just rotating around looking at the shape that I've made. Now the silhouette is going to change with all this, and the silhouette will really guide your eye. If you know what something looks like from the side, if you know what sort of shape you are looking for, then you can quickly sort of create that. Now the main thing that we need to start thinking about here is just adding simple landmarks like a nose or a mouth or things of that nature if we were creating a face. So the way we would do that, I'm going to turn off this polyframe here. So the polyframe is Shift F if you want to get used to the keyboard shortcuts, but I tend to just tap the button. After all the years I've been using Zbrush, I don't tend to see a keyboard shortcut like that. So this is where clay buildup comes up really useful. So let's look at clay buildups. That would be B for brush, C for clay, and then B for clay buildup. And then we can reduce the size of our cursor by holding down these square brackets, and then we can think about sort of just adding the basic landmarks. Now we're currently in symmetry mode. As you can see, I've got two cursors. Now if you press X on the keyboard, that will give you only one cursor. But of course, for the most part, when we're creating characters, we are working on things that are broadly speaking symmetrical, at least to start off with. We kind of break the symmetry later on, usually. So if we want to put an eyebrow ridge in here, we can do this sort of thing. If we want to suggest where a nose might be, we can do this. And we can think about where we might put a mouth. Okay? And then we can think about where the eyes might sit underneath that. That's all very flat, isn't it? So that's not really very useful, except it suggests where things should go, and then we can play around with the fact that we know that our the techniques that we've already learned so far are all very useful for manipulating the surface. I want to show you something else while we're working on this though. So I want to hold down Control, and this gives me a masking tool. So let's say that I wanted to create a nose. That will create an area where I can use my move tool to pull things around, as we said before. So what I need to do is create the area I want to pull around, and then if I just hold down Control and click, just press in empty space, that inverts my mask. And then I can grow my tool here, my brush should I say, and I can pull out nose. Now as you'll see, that's stretching all the polygons, but as we described before, once you've done this, once you've got the basic shape out of there that you want, you can hold down Control and drag in empty space. That will clear the masking, and then let's turn on polyframe so you can see it happen. If I click, hold down Control and drag in empty space, that re-dynameshes that object for me. Okay, so that's the power of Dynamesh, and we've created a nose. Now, one thing I've not really talked about very much, although I did mention it, is smoothing. So you can see we've got this jaggy edge around the edge now. Now I can smooth that out, just hold down the Shift key, come in, and we can smooth that out. Okay, so that would be your sort of basic process for manipulating an object in Zbrush. Now obviously what you then need to do is start to contemplate all of those forms that would underpin a face, because obviously the eyes don't sit on the surface like that, they sit back from the face. So you would possibly mask that area again. We could do the same thing. We could think about where the eye socket would be, broadly speaking, and then we could invert that mask and again pull this back. Okay, giving us a space where we can then consider building the eye. The other thing you would probably do, I'm going to keep this tutorial quite short, is that you would append into your subtools. You can go to append and you can append in a sphere, and once you've got a sphere in there, so you could append a sphere 3D, that would become an eyeball. You could duplicate that, that would become your second eyeball. But I'm not going to do that for this tutorial because I think it's overcomplicating it. So I'm going to clear my mask. I'm going to blend in that space. I'm going to change back to clay build-up, and I'm just going to sketch in sort of the kind of landmarks for an eyelid. Okay, and we contemplate where the eye itself would go. You could think about sort of like the area for the nostril. The lovely thing about clay build-up is it just keeps on going. So if I keep on sort of scribbling on top of this, you can see that it just keeps on going like that. Again, it's going to stretch your polygons out. Whenever you do any of this work, because you're in Dynamesh, it's going to stretch your polygons. So be cautious of that. So you could create an area using clay build-up, but again we wouldn't. What we would do is we would mask the area we want the ear to appear in. I'm creating sort of a goblin-y sort of thing, I guess. I'm kind of committed to that now. And again, we could invert the mask, go to move, and just pull out a shape here, and then you push this area back and out. Yeah, and you can always manipulate. That's completely flexible. It's probably quite big as an ear, even for a goblin. It's quite a big ear, but you get the idea. So that's again we unmask. So we click and drag to unmask, and then you can see all the stretching again. So we just Dynamesh again, and that again. It's kind of a rinse and repeat with that process. That's all we would do continuously. Is just refine that shape, refine that shape, refine that shape. And you can make incredibly big moves still. We've got all of this, we're still in move mode. We can make really large scale changes to the overall sort of shape of this. And then show the ear move there. This is the difference between move and move topological. So if I just undo that move there, if I go to BMT for move topological, pulling that area now doesn't pull the ear stays still. And that's the power of move topological as opposed to what move does. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of that. So we'd probably want to define a jawline. Let's turn off our wireframe and sort of think about. Didn't mean to do that. Did not mean to do that. Okay. Change the colour of that completely, haven't I? There we go. Made it the same colour as the background, which wasn't clever. So that was hitting the C key, by the way. So I missed the B key. So BCB for clay build up, and then you could sort of define where you want that jawline to be. Again, that kind of meets up there. We'd probably sort of add that with quite a bit of harshness. And then something I've not mentioned is the fact you can invert these brushes. So if you hold down the Alt key, you can invert and take away. And don't worry too much if this doesn't look tidy and elegant, because you can always use the Shift key just to smooth it all out again. You see the power of that smoothing. Okay. So you've got a jawline. Okay. Now you think again about sort of all of the landmarks that you want to create. So you know you would want to think about sort of the cheekbone and where that comes down from. You would want to think about sort of the muzzle of the mouth. I drew a mouth in there, but I didn't think about the sort of the shapes that would sit on top. So you would draw kind of the muzzle of the mouth. You would draw in the chin structure. Yeah, you draw in sort of in a more heavy way the sort of eyebrow and the eye socket. You could think about sort of emphasising the shapes that you want to create, and the bulging of the corner of the jawbone. Okay, and you see how quick that is. And again, you just go over and you smooth, and you've got your foundation for your face. Okay, and the eyes, don't pay any attention to the eyes here. That's just landmarking. That's just getting things in the right place. And in fact, they're not in the right place. They're still not exactly right. So again, we can go into the Move tool and we can just manipulate things like this and put them where we think they should go. Yeah. So that's all you're ever doing at this stage. And again, if I hit F and frame that, you can see that he's a bit, to my eye, he's a bit squat. And again, it's that power of that move that you can blow that brush up to be absolutely huge, and then you can just sort of like make structural changes to the entire shape of the head. As a goblin, you know, say we were making a goblin, I think this is too wide, so we can just change that to a kind of more sort of standard goblin shape. We can look at that nose again. Let's say we want something a bit sort of more elongated and sort of more goblin-like. We can do this sort of thing. So you're just playing around with form. You know, we've gone from a sphere to, well, still a bit of a lumpy mess. Admittedly, the back of the side profile is a mess. We've kind of focused on the shapes at the front, but you've seen how quick this is to fix. So you could, you get rid of this lump at the front here. You could pull this up and smooth all of that in. So you're getting something that is proportioned correctly. Then you kind of you probably would need. I'm not going to do this as part of this tutorial because this is really an overview. But you would create probably a mouth socket. You would put a hollow in there and build the mouth around that shape. In this instance, I'm not going to do that. But again, using clay build-up, you could very easily create a mouth. You create the structure around that mouth and just build it up. Build up the nostril, and then think about hollowing that out as well. So that's not just going to look like that. You could hold down the Alt key and build that shape in there. Yeah, looks very friendly at the moment, or can be quite sad. But again, if you're creating creatures that have got personality, you can just think about sort of the structure of the flesh on top of the eyebrow ridge, and bring that in, and very rapidly sort of create something that fits your character better. So again, blend. That's, you're just sketching in your concept and thinking about blending, and then I'm going to come out as final thing I'm going to do, because I want to just get to that sort of stage, just to explain the sort of how you build in sort of detail. So we've kind of done all of that. We have our Dynamesh object. We've manipulated it so some of the polygons look a little bit stretched now. So again, before we change this, I'm just going to drag in the space, and that's going to get rid of some of that stretching. But then eventually you're going to come out of Dynamesh. So you're going to untick the Dynamesh button. And then what I tend to do is Z-remesh it. Z-remesh is incredibly powerful. So this allows you to choose a target number of polygons here on this slider. And you can hit Z-remesh, and it will have a little think. There's a progress bar at the top of the screen, as you can see. And that will remesh with some quite nice topology, although you can add Z-remesher guides. Let's put a hole in there. That's actually quite unusual. Let's try a different number in here. See if it still creates that. Hopefully not. It's going to break my tutorial if it does it again, isn't it? I might have to think again if it puts another hole in there. Luckily it didn't. Okay, so you've got some quite nicely structured topology in there. There are these things called Z-remesh guides in the brush palette, so they're the last thing in the brush palette, and they allow you to draw guides for Z-remesher. What we do is you can always Google that if you want to look into how that works. The one thing I wanted to talk about was subdivision surfaces. So right at the top of the geometry tab, you can see you've got a load of stuff that's to do with subdividing the surface. So there's a higher res button. As you can see, the keyboard shortcut for that is D. It really is worth learning this set of keyboard shortcuts, because you'll be doing it all the time. Divide is Control D, and lower res is Shift D. And all those things combined allow you to do some really powerful stuff. It's essentially the core of how Zbrush works. So currently, as you can see here, we have 3,126 points of vertices. If I press Control D, that will subdivide that mesh, and every single quad we had before there has now become 4 quads. If we toggle polyframe, you'll see that. Okay, we can do that again. So we're currently at 12,000 polys. Control D will give us 49,000 polys. I've got a bit more surface detail. Control D again will give us 199,000 polys, giving us further detail again. Control D again will give us 799,000 polys, and Control D one more time, so we're at subdivision level 6 from that very low poly model, will give us 3 million polygons. Now 3 million polygons give us all the power we want to do some incredible things with this. You can add incredibly fine surface detail. So let's look at our standard tool. Standard tool will draw on a surface like this. You don't use standard tool very often if you get into sculpting. You tend to use the clay tools, but the standard tool allows you to change the stroke type. Let's choose drag rectangle. Then we can choose an alpha to use on that drag rectangle. So I'm jumping right ahead now to how you would add things like wrinkles or pores. So let's say we wanted to add pores to our creature. So we can zoom right in on the nose area, and we want to add pores. Now they're facing the wrong way, okay, don't mind the spots. So what we can do is hold down the Alt key, and we can press that in and create quite severe pores in that instance. But don't forget, everything is controllable, so your Z intensity is the depth at which you're drawing. So if we make that, say, 7 instead of the 25 that it was on, again hold down the Alt key, you can see you're creating a very subtle effect on that surface. 7's probably a little bit too subtle. Let's change it to, say, 10, and then hold down Alt and drag, and there you go. You're getting a really nice breakup of that surface. Okay. You'll just have to trust me that that's using polygons, because it is. But obviously we're at such a high resolution now that when we rotate we see the low res version, but you can't really see the polygons. There are more polygons than you have pixels on your screen. So that's the basic ins and outs of how ZBrush works. You could add colour, as you can see at the top. You're in Z add at the moment. We've talked about the fact that you can change that to Z sub by holding the Alt key. You can change you can untick that Z add. You can go to RGB. You can change a colour here, and it will fill the object. But additionally, you can start off with a filled object, so we can go to colour, fill object, and that will now fill it with that colour. Now when we change the colour in here, we don't change that colour, but what we can do is add in, as we did before, colour using the same alpha, but you can change this, say, to colour spray, and then colour spray will do this sort of thing, we'll spray in your alpha with a bit of spray pattern as well, so you can bolt in, sort of like highlight the end of the nose. So you can colorise your objects in here as well. I'll be honest with you, I don't tend to do any sort of like serious painting inside of ZBrush. There are better packages for creating texture painting for games, for instance, such as Substance Painter, that are much more preferable to working in ZBrush. But if you want to get down the sort of the basics, that's the strongest, quickest way I can think of to think about getting the basics down. So that's the sort of overview of how ZBrush works. Don't forget to sort of play around with the sort of variations of the tools that you've got in here, because some of these tools are amazing. You've got things like Flatten Tools. If I hit BFA, for instance, you can flatten out sort of the let's just flatten the we're in colour mode. Didn't mean to be in colour mode. So we're in flatten, and I'll start painting with colour, aren't I? In fact, I'm going to rewind all of that. I said I'd talk about the infinite rewind. There we go. We can infinitely rewind right back to where we started, right back to a sphere, and all the way back again. So that's incredibly powerful. So let's look at flatten quickly. So that would flatten that area there. So if you want hard edges on things, you've got many tools that do similar sorts of things, that manipulate the surface of the mesh. So yeah, it's absolute tip of the iceberg, this tutorial. Lots and lots of things to learn, lots of cool tools that you could utilise. One of my favourites is snake hook. You have to be very careful when you're using it, but that's how you want to make the point of the ear really pointy. Snake hook's great for that sort of thing, but you can go a bit mad with it, as you can see. But for getting that, for just extruding areas like that, that'd be incredibly powerful. So just keep playing. I mean, it's a really fun package to learn, and it doesn't take a long time to get the basics down. The main thing I would probably say is that you need good, strong anatomical reference when you're learning to sculpt. It's not just a matter of learning the tools inside of ZBrush, it is a matter of understanding what it is you're trying to sculpt and how forms fit together. But that's the basics. That's the basics of how ZBrush works. I hope you've learned something.